Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be painting up Basdraug Nekk-Choppa, which is the Warhammer commemorative model for the first year of Warhammer Plus. Yeah, boo me. But I got this model now and I'm going to paint it, and for this one I am going to try to flex my painting skills and try to go above and beyond. And so I assembled the model up to the point he would get in the way of painting. His arms are separate, and his little blade of chaos on his hip is separate, and then I prime them all with great Bright Touch gray car primer. And then here are all the paints that I used throughout this entire thing, all of them. Now I wanted to, for this one, actually use no metallic paints, and I did for everything that was not gold, but then apparently he has some Stormcast Eternal trophies on him, and I could not figure out how to paint those without metal, so those are the only exception. So apart from that, everything else is non-metallic metal. And now with Liquitex modeling putty, I applied this all over his 50mm base. I think it's 50mm. And then I rapidly dried the top of the hair dryer, and once I was done, I flattened it onto a paper towel to give it just a little bit of texture and to flatten it out and make sure it doesn't spread onto my table. And then once that was done, I then pressed my model into it after it had dried from priming and stuff, and so it made a little indent that I didn't really use. And now with Eshin Gray, Gray Sear, and White Scar White, we're going to do the pre-coating. So with an airbrush, I apply Eshin Gray from downwards, or from the bottom, and so that'll create the shadow. Then I will apply Gray Sear up top, so that it'll create the light. Now, one thing to note is that the reason why I use Gray Sear, not the True White, is because the True White has a lot of trouble with an airbrush and it comes out speckled and stuff. So this off-white Gray Sear is a pretty close white and it comes out smooth, and so it does a good job. And then I take a dry brush and I dry brush the entire model with White Scar White. Now, one thing to note is that I don't really know what I'm going to be getting myself into fully, so the dry brushing, in some parts it's necessary, in other parts it was not necessary. In some parts it was very helpful, in some parts it wasn't, but even in some places where it wasn't, it was used as a guiding line to help me see where I needed to paint, show highlights and stuff like that. It was very useful on the chains, I will tell you that, and it was also very useful on his axe. Alright then, with Lamian Medium, Orruk Flesh, Pallid Witch Flesh, and when I get to the oil paints Viridian Hue, we're going to paint the skin. So what I do first is I mix, well, my measurements is 2 brushes of Orruk Flesh and 3 drops of Lamian Medium, which is useless to you because you have to have my same brushes and my same dropper in order to get the same results. But essentially, it's a little bit more Lamian Medium than Orruk Flesh, turns it into wash, and I apply it all over the model. It's thick enough that it's not watery, but it can easily still be translucent. You can see the undercoating. And once that's done, I then mix up the Viridian Hue with some mineral spirits to turn into a wash, and then I apply it onto the model. However, unfortunately, I made it a little too thin, and so basically I had to apply like several washes until it was the right color and depth. And then once that was done, I don't remember if I did a slight wipe. Nah, actually I didn't. And then basically I went back with Orruk Flesh and I repainted all the highlighted areas, or like the upper more raised areas. These are obvious because the pre-coating kind of shows you where the highlights are. Then basically all I did was I mixed in a little bit of Pallid Witch Flesh with the Orruk Flesh, lightening it, and then I applied further highlights, more upper, more raised. Basically, wherever I previously highlighted, I covered about maybe 50 to 75% of it, and then I added more Pallid Witch Flesh to Orruk Flesh, and then did even finer highlights. This was a back and forth, and it's something you have to feel out. But basically, wash shade, then oil wash to add depth, then highlight, extra highlight, fine highlight. Yes. And the reason why I started with the skin is because the way his model is built, the skin is like inside, and so it's easier to get this thing out of the way because there's other pieces and stuff that are sort of in the way in some areas, and so it would be easier to get this done now without accidentally spilling any paint over or ruining anything in the future. Alright, with Eshin Gray, Dawnstone, and Administratum Gray, we're going to paint his pants. Now, one thing I didn't show at the beginning was I also took some Nuln Oil. So basically what we do is cover his whole pants in Eshin Gray. Then what we do is we apply the Nuln Oil to add some extra shading. Then we redo a highlight covering like 90% of the pants with Eshin Gray. Then we re-highlight again with Dawnstone, watered down a bit so that it flows better. And then fine highlights of Administrative Gray on the highest folds or raised areas on the pants. Alright then, with Cabalite Green, Cadian Flesh Tone, Mephiston Red, Evil Sun Scarlet, and I don't use Troll Slayer Orange because it won't be noticeable, I start to do some details on the face. So first I take some Cabalite Green, mix it with a little bit of water so it can flow better, and I basically outline the edges of his face. The flesh around his metal eye patch, the skin that folds on his mouth, the area around his nose, and his eye and bottom eyelid. Then I take Cadian Flesh Tone with a lot of water, basically 1 part water and like 6 or 7 parts water and 1 part paint, and then apply it to that cut wound he has on top of his head and maybe a little bit on his nose. Then I take Mephiston Red with a little bit of water to make it flow better, and then I apply it into the cut on his head, and then I apply it onto his eye that's there. Then I take the Evil Sun Scarlet and with a thin brush just tap into his eye to create the pupil, and that's it. I didn't have any more room for Troll Slayer Orange, I was like, it doesn't matter. Alright then, with Mephiston Red, Magos Purple, and Troll Slayer Orange, we're going to paint his tongue. So basically, we're going to paint it red with Mephiston, we're going to apply Magos Purple, we're going to re-highlight it with Mephiston, add Magos Purple, a re-highlight, and then do a fine highlight of Troll Slayer Orange on the tip of his tongue and stuff. And that's about it. Alright, with Steel Legion Drab, Nuln Oil, Baneblade Brown, and Karak Stone, we're going to paint his teeth. So we're going to apply Steel Legion Drab as the base color on all his teeth. Then once that is done, we're going to apply 1 or 2 layers of Nuln Oil onto his teeth to make sure they're properly blackened. Then we go through with Steel Legion Drab as a highlight, then covering like 80 to 90% of each tooth, then Baneblade Brown covering 50 to maybe 60-75% of each tooth, and then Karak Stone on the last 25, maybe 30% of each tooth. Alright, with Uriel Yellow mixed with some Lamian Medium, I don't use the Fire Dragon Bright. So basically what I do is I make a wash of the Uriel Yellow and the thing. I do like 2 parts Uriel to 3 parts Lamian, and then I paint the whole yellow armor. which at this point I wanted to pivot and try an oil wash with it because I think it would be better, but in the end this effect wasn't that good. And then with cadmium orange turned into a wash with mineral spirits, a little too thin though, I then apply it all over the yellow armor with the finest camera angles. Yeah, it's on there. And then after that dries, I then wipe it away, and then I go back with the Uriel yellow mixed with Lamian medium, and I do a highlight on all the sharp edges of his armor. He has a lot of it because it looks like it's just hammered in. And it looks okay. The color is not solid though, that really bugs me. Alright, with Steel Legion Drab, Eshin Grey, Baneblade Brown, and Dawnstone, I'm going to paint the horns that come out of his chest. So basically what I try to do is paint the first half Steel Legion Drab and the second half with Eshin Grey, but then that looked terrible because it was such an obvious transition, so then I took like a 50-50-ish mix of Steel Legion and Eshin Grey and then filled the middle of each horn with it, and so there was like went from Steel Legion to a mix to Eshin Grey. Then once that's done, I then highlighted the horns by painting lines coming from the base to the tip with Baneblade Brown. And then once that was done, I then re-highlighted the highlights like halfway through the horns with Dawnstone. And so it looked pretty decent. Now with Abaddon Black and none of the others, because I decided to skip a certain step or postpone it to later. So basically what I did was I took the Abaddon Black, watered it down so it would flow better, and a thin brush, and I painted these little fiery symbols on his feet and the bottom of his chest pad to add some character to his armor. Alright, with Rhinox Hide and Steel Legion Drab, I'm going to do the shaft of his axe. There's only a tiny part of the wood that's actually showing. So what I do is I take Rhinox Hide and water it down so it's a little translucent and apply it onto the wood, and it does a bit of a natural highlighting. I then take the Rhinox Hide and mix it with Steel Legion Drab, and then I paint lines and basically highlight what I can imagine as like the edges of the wood and stuff. Then I go back and do the same thing again with more Steel Legion Drab, and then I do an even finer pure Steel Legion Drab at the very end with a thin brush to create the lines, and that's done. Alright, with Nuln Oil, Dawnstone, Grayseer, Administrative Grey, and Seraph Sepia, we're going to paint his axe. Now, one thing I didn't show is that when I painted his pants with the Eshin Grey, I also applied that mix onto his axe and the metal pieces as a start. So that's Eshin Grey white, that's dark right there, but it's thinned down stuff. So then I applied Nuln Oil to darken it, and basically what I did is I took Dawnstone to highlight Then I went with Gray Seer to highlight, and then Administrative Gray. Basically, I was just painting lines and highlights wherever I wanted and stuff. It was more of a hodgepodge because I really didn't know what I was doing, and I don't even recall too well how I managed it in the end, because I captured some of it on the picture, but like sometimes I fiddled with it here and there. But basically, I added shading to it, highlighted, added more shading to bring it into line so it wasn't too extreme highlights, and then I added Serif Sepia in some places to add like a browning in some places of the metal. And it was a bunch of back and forth. It turned out pretty good, actually. And now with Screaming Skull, Skeleton Horde Contrast, and Nuln Oil, we're going to paint the skull boss, the orc boss's skull that's on top. So we start with the base layer of Screaming Skull, and so here's the process. I apply the color, then I apply Skeleton Horde Contrast. I actually mix a little bit of water in it to make it flow better and to dilute it. Then I re-highlight the skull, then I apply Skeleton Horde Contrast, then I re-highlight again, and it's back and forth as many times as you like to get the amount of shading. Thin layers of Skeleton Horde makes it so that it doesn't become too much too quickly. And then once that's done, Nuln Oil. So the teeth are kind of blackish, so I apply a few coats of the Nuln Oil onto the teeth to darken them, and I re-highlight them with Screaming Skull, although I went a little bit too extreme with the contrasting colors. Basically, I did 2 coats of Nuln and then Screaming Skull. What I should have done was Nuln, then Screaming, Nuln, then Screaming, and so the black teeth are a little too black. But yeah, and that's how the skull turned out. Alright, with Rhinox Hide, Screaming Skull, and Skeleton Horde Contrast, I painted these horns that were on the back of his armor and also like up above, up top. And so a few things to note. So they were basically painted differently. The horns on top, the bottom part was painted with Rhinox Hide purely, and then Screaming Skull was on top. The horns that are on his back were a little bit different. Basically, Rhinox Hide all throughout, then a mix of Screaming Skull and Rhinox Hide towards the middle, and then a pure Screaming Skull at the end. Or, this is what I recall. And then basically Skeleton Horde Contrast to tone it down in color, and basically what I did was, for the top horns, basically Skeleton Horde Contrast highlighted with Screaming Skull, Skeleton Horde Contrast again, highlighted with Screaming Skull. I made sure to water down the Skeleton Horde a little bit so it was more manageable. And basically I did that until I liked the effects of re-highlighting, and so like the horns, the highlighted lines would go from darker to lighter into the tip, and for the horns that were on his back, I did it a bit different. I basically did a mix of the Rhinox Hide and Screaming Skull that was lighter than the horn around it, and highlighted it, painted lines from the thick part down to the thin part. Then I added more Screaming Skull into the mix, re-highlighted that, re-highlighted again with more Screaming Skull until it went from a dark highlight to a light line. Basically the line of each highlight went from a darker to a lighter. And that's how I did it. It's a little all over the place. And 2 notes, the skulls on the back of his chains were painted in the same way as the skull on the top. I just didn't showcase them. And the chains that were there were also painted with the same paint as the pants. The pants were painted also with like Eshin Gray, but I actually did do a mix of Lamian Medium, now that I recall, mixed with it, and that created all these chains and all their highlights. So the pre-coating shows all the highlighted lines on the chain, so that was good. Now with Baneblade Brown, Agrax Earthshade, and Lamian Medium, we're going to paint all of his bandages. So we're going to do a mix of Baneblade Brown and Lamian Medium to create a wash. Now I had to use, for some reason Baneblade Brown was more translucent, so I had to add more. So basically it was 3 drops of Lamian and 4 brushes of Baneblade Brown, because it was just more translucent. Then I applied this all over his bandages, and because of all the pre-coating and stuff, there were some nice highlights in there. Then I took Agrax Earthshade, almost pure, mixed in a little bit of Lamian Medium, because Lamian Medium helps the shades and washes flow better, like evenly spread. And then I applied like maybe 1 or 2 coats. It depends, because this is going to depend for you too, because how much Lamian you mix in with Agrax is going to affect the depth. So you might do a little more than me or might less than me. And so I basically applied it until it was dark enough, and make sure it's fully dried between coats. And also, after I applied it, I made sure to dry off my brush and then like dip my brush back onto the model to suck up any excess paint that was in the gaps and recesses. I didn't want the space between his arm and the bandages to get flooded with it, so I made sure to empty it out so that there wouldn't be this huge blackened area in there just where the wash fell in. Alright, with Abaddon Black, Hoeth Blue, and Baharoth Blue, we're going to paint black metal. Alright, so we're going to take Abaddon Black, the blackest black, and we're going to apply it onto his shins, and he has his left shoulder pad, and these like odd pieces of metal that are around here and there. Take your pick. It's your model, if you have one actually. Or if you have the Orc War Boss model. And so painted all those Abaddon Black. And so because the metal looks beaten, I took Hoeth Blue, watered down a little bit so it flows better, and I painted all the edges and raised areas, which is very obvious if you have the model, because the metal essentially looks like it's beaten in, so it's very clear and obvious where the highlights are. And then once that was done, I then applied drops of Baharoth Blue at the most raised pointed areas, sort of as a little eye-catching highlight. And that was it. Alright, so following the box art again, he has some of these other bandages that hold some stuff up top his trophies. So with Dawnstone, watered down a lot, I apply it onto his little bandages there. Since there's pre-coating and stuff, it does highlight pretty well. And once that's done, I apply around 2 coats of Nuln Oil, because Nuln Oil is actually pretty thin. And sorry about the camera angles. Alright, so this is pretty much what happened. Eshin Grey, Nuln Oil, Dawnstone, and Seraph Zephyr. We're going to take care of his chainmail. So we're going to take Eshin Grey, apply it all over his chainmail. He has it in several places. Then we're going to apply Nuln Oil all over the chainmail. It'll fill in the holes to make it look dark. And once that's dry, usually with the help of a hairdryer, we're going to reapply Eshin Grey on all the raised areas, the outer parts of the chain links. Then we're going to take Dawnstone and apply it on the most raised parts of the chains. Like around half of them, basically. Half of the area. Then we're going to apply Seraph Zephyr in some places randomly, or all over, depends if you want to add a little brown. And I don't show it, but in the end I do another layer of Dawnstone to make some areas like stand out a bit more. Alright, with Eshin Grey, Dawnstone, and Administrative Grey, we're going to try to paint the eye patches. He has one on his eye, and he has one on, you know what, I'm going to guess that his predecessor's eye. So here's basically what's going to happen. We're going to take the Eshin Grey and apply it as a dark base. Then we're going to take Dawnstone and we're going to apply it on all the edges of the metal pieces, the center, and the tips of the metal dots that are on the eye patches. Then we're going to take Administrative Grey and we're going to apply it like on the tips of the metal, the edges, the fine edges and stuff. We want it to cover, so Eshin Grey is the entire thing, Dawnstone probably covers 75%, and then Administrative Grey probably covers 25 to 40% of these pieces. And it's okay. Alright, with Nuln Oil, I go back and apply around 2 coats onto the black and blue metal to dull the blue a little more so it blends in with the black, because it's a little too strong on highlights. Alright, with Administrative Grey, Steel Legion Drab, we're going to paint the stone he's on. So basically what I do is I take Administrative Grey and I water it down heavily. And so essentially, I apply it all over, and it just fills in the gaps, add a bit of color, the pre-shading is there, it looks pretty decent. but there's a lot of color, like where his foot is around from paint and oil that slid down. So what I do is I then take kind of the pure administrative gray and apply it just to cover up that extra color. Then I take Steel Legion Drab, water it down a lot, and apply it in select areas to add some color to the stone. Alright, with Eshin Gray and Dawnstone, I'm using these a lot, but I'm going to add some character to the armor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Eshin Gray and with a very fine brush, I'm going to apply like scratches and dents in the armor. I'm trying to do no metal. So I place like dot dot dot, scratch a line, dot dot dot, scratch a line, squiggle a little bit, scratch a line, dot dot dot, around on the edges, corners and stuff, and there's a lot of them. It's hard to say whether to use a lot or what perceives to be a lot. I would say less is more in this case. Then I take Dawnstone, which is the lighter color, and I try to apply it in like half of the Eshin Gray areas, on top or beneath the Eshin Gray, and this will give an illusion of different types of angles of penetration or scuffs on the armor. Now, in some places I did a little bit too much, and it kind of filled in a lot of the Eshin Gray. Might have ruined some of the character. It's hard to say. And then with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, I then apply this all over the model. And I also super glued it to this base I just threw together. Alright, with Retributor Armor and Liberator Gold, I'm going to have to bite the bullet because I can't figure out how to do gold with what paints I have and stuff. So, Retributor Armor is the dark color onto the Stormcast Eternal pieces he has. He has several of them in his hand, hip, left shoulder pad, right shoulder pad, apparently according to the box, and then highlight it with Liberator Gold. But it wasn't good enough, so I took some Seraph Sephiroth and applied like 2 pure coats into some areas to add some shadow and depth. I then assembled the model with super glue. And done. Well, that was an interesting model kit. The first of the limited editions that I have. Alright, that first picture's a little dark, dang. Alright then, so interesting things about the model. So, a few things I would point out. So I didn't show how I did some of the details, because this video was already taking long, and he was already taking a long time to paint. It took me a long time to paint because there was a lot of different things to figure out and just try, and I was trying a lot of different things. So the plume that he had from the red hair, it was just like Mephiston red and Skeleton Horde contrast, and I did layers of it. Red, Skeleton Horde, red, Skeleton Horde, shade a certain part of it, or overbrush some parts of it so that it would highlight more, Skeleton Horde, and basically I repeated the process until it had some coloration, and that was it. As far as the model goes, there are a few things I would change that now that I've learned from this. The armor, I should have just done a pure solid yellow. Forget the highlighting, pre-highlighting and stuff, and just use regular paints. The oil paints were a little too inconsistent and out of control for me to get right on this. The non-metallic metal, I did some stuff back and forth and redid some things here and there, but the axe had so much texture. What I should have done was, after the pre-coating, just hit them with a thin wash of like administrative gray or gray sear to add some more like color into it, and then just add darker washes, darker and darker, and that probably would have been better for creating more accurate stuff according to the model. And yeah, I think I didn't mention it, but as well, so yeah, I mentioned all that. And so the model kit is interesting. So he is a variation of the war boss for the Orruks in Age of Sigmar. They split off into tons of factions. I don't remember what their name is, but he's a variation of their model. He doesn't have a giant like T-Rex skull on his right shoulder, so he's a bit different. it was a lot of experimentation. So the axe came out really well, the metal came out really well in the end after practicing, doing some things here and there. I learned a lot of stuff from this. A lot of stuff, first time trial for a lot. The horns, a lot of experimentation there. This is basically me practicing, experimenting a lot. I don't know if I want to sell this model or not. I don't know. I'll see if a friend of mine wants it or not or something. And if they don't want it, I'll sell it. Or maybe keep it as a trophy. I don't know. But anyway, so them's the breaks. And yeah, so I don't know what to think of this model. It was a good learning experience, a good flex to practice a lot of skills that I don't use, and turned out pretty good. Overall, I would say at least a solid 8 out of 10. Overall, maybe 9-ish, getting close to there because of like how well the axe looks. Actually really, really good. Alright, and that's it for that, but I do have a small announcement-ish. So, it has been 10 months since I have been monetized on YouTube, and I finally got a payday. Yay! And so I'm trying to figure out what I should do with that specifically. Maybe find something good or decent, model more like out of the way. I have one thing planned for January I want to try that's non-Games Workshop stuff, just for fun, and since I can now afford it with that. But maybe some other model kit I might be missing. Or who knows, maybe I'll just get Angron. So if anyone has any unique requests, originally I was just going to buy one of those giants from Age of Sigmar, but they went from 150 to 210. That's not happening. What the crap, Games Workshop, you're high. Yeah, so if anyone has any interesting like suggestions and stuff for like maybe around like a $50 model or something in GW stuff, it might be worth looking into or something if anyone has anything. And also for that, well, as I said, I've been monetized for 10 months and I finally got paid. So I'm actually going to begin trying to monetize the channel a little further with Amazon links and stuff. So a lot of the stuff I regularly use, they're going to find the links in the description. I'm going to try to see if I can also get them all in there. So if anyone wants to help support me and stuff and get a little extra money so I can actually do more crazy stuff. So, well, not really crazy, but like, I am actually kind of limited in what I can paint. There's some things that are for my army and they're so cool that I must try. But a lot of stuff is stuff that I kind of have to paint to keep the channel afloat. Well, basically, I buy stuff, I paint it, looks cool, I sell it, which allows me to buy 2 more things instead of 1. And some things are hit or miss, some things are positive or not, and stuff. And so hopefully monetizing the channel a little further with like an Amazon affiliate and stuff will help me to be able to have more interesting models, or the bigger models, because surprisingly a lot of the bigger character models are never really shown that much to be painted on YouTube. Like I would like to paint the giants and try that, because a lot of my character models are really constantly reviewed and there's not really that many people. Like people like watching Croak, the video, Rodigus, stuff like that, the Glotkin even, because there's a few videos on the Glotkin, but yeah. And so this probably would help me in the end be able to try more stuff. So if you ever want to support me or check out some of the stuff I can hopefully sell, maybe get a little bit of cash from it, hopefully be able to try some new models out. But until then, yeah, so help me if you want or not. And so, yeah, that's it. So moving on, actually the next model is going to be another Beast of Nurgle. I'm going to get that green right. So like the video if you like the video, comment if you want to comment, share if you want to share it, and I'll be back soon. Maybe, who knows.